Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I hope everyone had a good lunch and was able to take a little break. So, we're going to now have a discussion with some incredible leaders. And so, I'm going to read their bios. This session is entitled, What is a Movement? Leadership Models Accountability. And so I'm just going to start by reading their bios, and we will mix it up in terms of questions. So first, at the far, what am I, left over here? My far left is Professor Leo Douglas. Leo Douglas is a clinical associate professor in liberal studies, and he is the director of the Caribbean Initiative and NYU Center for Latin America and Caribbean Studies. He received his PhD and a Master's of Ecology, Evolution, and Environmental Biology, and an Advanced Environmental Policy Certificate from Columbia University, Uptown. He is the past president of Birds Caribbean, the largest single international NGO focusing on biodiversity in the Caribbean region, and his previous professional experiences include work as the executive director of BirdLife Jamaica, a project manager for the United States Agency for International Developments, or USAID Jamaica, Sustainable Watershed Management Project. He is also the former Fulbright OSA Ecology Scholar, Government of Jamaica Millennium Scholar, Musgrave winner, Medal Award winner for distinguished eminence in the field of science, and also a Partners in Flight Leadership Award winner for outstanding contribution to bird conservation. He is also a 2021 NYU Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Faculty Award recipient, and both his academic and NGO work and interests focus on the intersections of Blackness, biodiversity, and environmental education. And I have to give a shout out for Leo's work with our ERJN network, which is our Environmental, Racial, and Justice network that was started, and his contributions to that network and a partnership with the Office of Global Inclusion have been amazing, outstanding, and a role model. Thank you, Leo, for all of your partnership and the terrific work that you do across NYU. Next, Dr. Donaldson Conserve. Am I pronouncing the last name? Okay. Is an associate professor in the Department of Prevention and Community Health in the Milken Institute of Public Health at the George Washington University, which is in DC. He is also the associate director of the Jill Lebovic Center for Community Health in Caribbean and Latin America, and the founder of the Black Male Professors and Research Collective, BMPRC initiative. His research focuses on implementing community-based distribution of self-testing interventions to address inequities and scale up population impact. He has contributed to national efforts and policy to integrate HIV testing, distribution into routine health services in Tanzania, and has expanded to his native country of Haiti and other sub-Saharan African countries with collaborators from the HIV Self-Testing Africa STAR initiative. As a key part of the Black Male Professors and Research Collective, as I said, BMPRC initiative, he is spearheading a movement aimed at increasing research curiosity among younger Black individuals in the US and abroad, including Africa, and the goal is to ignite and create stronger inspiration among Black men who are embarking on their journey of obtaining doctoral degrees and ultimately pursuing academic research careers. Please join me in welcoming Donald Conserve. William Pruitt, III, Associate Vice President, right here on my immediate left, Associate Vice President of Global Programs. William Pruitt is the Associate Vice President of Global Programs, and prior to joining NYU, you've been here how many years now? A year and a half. He has held administrative positions with study abroad operations in Shanghai, Finance University, Virginia Tech, and the University of South Carolina. During his tenure in the field of international education, he has also served on NAfSA's Education Abroad Knowledge Community for Diversity and Inclusion. And Dr. Pruitt has contributed articles to the International Research and Review Journal and Inside Higher Ed. He has also served as a member of the Fulbright Specialist Program. He holds a PhD in Higher Education Administration from Virginia Tech and completed his doctoral research on predicting study abroad propensity among college students. He received his BA and MBA from Winthrop University in Political Science. And it is a pleasure to work in partnership with Will here at NYU in the Office of Global Programs, who is a great support to the work that we do in the Office of Global Inclusion. So now we will start with some questions. How's that sound? So I have some questions for you all, which right now I can't find, so I'm just looking. Here we are. Okay. So I'll start with you, Professor Douglas. In your experience, and so, we're talking a lot about movements, and we know that you know a lot about movements, social movements, etc. So in your experience, what would you say are some of the key building blocks for a successful movement? If you speak and it's not working, you can have mine.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Um, yes. So in terms of, social movements are about creating change. And, what we are all about is about creating positive change. Um, Social movements, I must say, have always been a part of the lived experience of humankind. Um, just over lunch, we were having a conversation about early arrivals of people from Africa in the Caribbean and the innovations that they brought. How they resisted power, how they organized, how they survived, how they created, who we are today, how we embody their legacy and, continue this process of wanting social change, of desiring social change, of recognizing that this can never be just about the individual. That each and every one of us can have a very powerful ripple effect on issues that we care about, issues of the day. My parents embodied this in many ways. My dad had 3 churches in rural Jamaica. He ran these like community centers, places where people would come and organize, not just about faith, but about how the land was used, what was going to be planted in the next rainy season, how kids were going to be sent to school. So, when we talk about movements as well, it's also important to recognize that there can be various scales and levels of movement. This could be in a single community. Something which is just happening at one location within a larger country or setting. It could be an entire region. It could be national across the United States. It could be something that's happening global. All of those are important. And all of those are happening at the same time and are embedded in each other. Some of the things that, in terms of just setting the stage, in terms of how we think about movement, again, is also to kind of think about that there are very different types of movements. I reflect on one extreme right now, which has been, we are all coming out of this incredible period of COVID and the George Floyd era. When we have heard calls, rather justified calls, for the police force to be defunded. That's very, what some people would say is radical, very far-reaching, and having that type of change is usually what people say is, trying to create an entire transformation. But sometimes, we that's not our aim, to kind of then tear it all down and then build it back up, kind of thing. But we're trying to insert ourselves in the system. We are having a conference and we are educating others about specific issues, and we're all becoming ambassadors to then move an idea, a concept, an approach forward, and how this kind of then catches on and moves, through the society above and beyond what's happening with us on the stage and people in this room. I'm going to stop and give other people a chance to say, but that's where I'll start.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So I'm actually going to we're the questions I'll interrelate them as we go forward. But so as we think about movements, and in particularly as Leo was talking, Donaldson, as we think about the movement, my question for you is: you are actually helping to spearhead movements aimed at increasing research and curiosity, as I read in your bio, among Black individuals, and in particular thinking about PhD programs, study abroad, etc. So as you think about that type of movement, what do you see as some of the opportunities and challenges that you faced and some of the future possibilities?
Thank you very much, Dr. Coleman, and thank you for setting the stage. I'd like to share a little bit more about why I started, this initiative, and then eventually take it from there. It was actually here at NYU. I was attending a training program organized in the medical school designed to increase diversity among underrepresented minorities. And while I was in the audience, the director of the program said, we have a hard time recruiting black men for this program. I think I was a tenure track faculty just starting out. And I was the only black male in a group of maybe 30 individuals who was a faculty member. And although he was not talking to me at the time, but I couldn't help but to go back to my undergraduate days when I used to be a recruiter and the vice president and then eventually the president of the Science Organization of Minority Students. And I think for me, this is where I started to learn about movement on a campus, on a personal level and also academic level, to the point where we would, I would look for funds to take students to Washington, D.C. or other places to visit different schools, exposure to eventually help more of the students in this organization become interested in research, medical school, dental school, and facilitate their ways into these other next steps of their journey. So going back to those days, I thought, well, I'm no longer an undergraduate student, but this sounded like it was a call for another movement, however small it may have been. So immediately, I started the Black Male Professors, Researchers, and Doctors group on Facebook, and then I used that platform to reach, different individuals and then tell them about this program at NYU, and that's how it started. And then from there, this was back in 2016 and 2017. Eventually, that worked out. The program had more black males after this platform. They had more black men, and so every year, they would reach back out to me and say, Donaldson, we need you to help, recruit. So I continued to do so until, George Floyd incident happened. And I think everyone, felt the need to maybe do something, even if you couldn't get out with COVID. And I started to think more about my ultimate goal of mentoring and trying to reach younger youths in different locations. And giving the virtual platforms that was really booming, with Zoom and everything else, I said, well, this is the time. There's no limit. I don't need to be in every place. So then I made the initiative more formal. I took out the doctors part because there was another group I found out that's black male doctors. So then I said, okay, let's focus on research.
Yeah, I used to work for the AAMC, so
Okay.
Yeah.
So there you go. So I saw that there was a gap more for the research and academic side. So that's how it started. And for me, I think one of the opportunities that I've started to experience is, like I receive emails from different black male PhD students who are like, oh, I saw your organization. Actually, one student is doing his dissertation on the experience of black male faculty at predominantly white institution, and he reached out to me and said, I'm so happy to see this organization. Can you help me with recruitment? And so forth and so on. So that's just one example, just being able to have the platform there for whoever is interested in finding more support, whether you're at the undergraduate level, doctoral, master's, professor level. And one of the challenges you mentioned, as part of the question for me is, to be honest, when I was starting out the organization and thinking of making it more national, I was thinking, okay, I'm a black man in academia, and you're promoting blackness. How is that going to be viewed by your non-black faculty, and how can it potentially be used to penalize you, given that you are a black man? And so I had a decision to make on how much I was going to maybe tone it down a bit versus, really going out and say, you know what, I'm comfortable enough in my career that I think my work outside of the Black Male Initiative will speak for itself. And then I will let this move, this small scale, movement take its own course. I won't, dumb it down or try to hide it. So that's one of the challenges I used to think about. And then future scales, I'm hoping that we can have, maybe regional chapters and maybe all coordinate with universities for the undergraduate level, and then for the academic professorship level to have support groups where that could help. Because I think a lot of universities want to increase diversity, and they are doing the best that they can. But then I think it also speaks volume to kind of take initiative to provide additional support for the faculty that they're recruiting, black men or black women, right? And this is just one of the examples that I hope can be part of that future.
Thank you for so much, and thank you for talking about some of the specifics, and particularly at the graduate level, because we know a lot of focus has been on the undergraduate level, so this is an intervention. And also, thanks for talking about the challenges and sort of blackness, representation of self and others, and how to manage that. And we'll come back to some of that, and perhaps even we'll pick up on some of this. So Will, as we think about building movements, right, we know we have young leaders who are helping to build these movements. And as you think about young leaders in this process of movement building, what would you talk about in terms of considering to prepare yourself, right? You've had an arc of a career where you've been abroad, you've done a lot of different types of things. So how do you prepare yourself to be a leader of a movement, and to involve other people?
It's a great question. Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Thank you, everybody. So, along the journey, I've noticed that a lot of people, especially in leadership positions, have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Leadership is a very, very difficult place to be. I mean, there are people coming at you from all angles. You're always doing something wrong. You're never going to be in the right. You're always going to have what they call haters. So it's very important as a leader to first off go in understanding that, and know that you have to have very thick skin as a leader. But more importantly, you have to study people before you. I think a lot of times we walk into situations without doing our due diligence on what people before us went through to get to the positions that they're in and how they handle those situations. So a lot of leaderships, if we look at social movements from the past, whether they go as far back as revolutionaries fighting on slave ships as leaders, or you go back to the civil rights movements, or you go back to maroon colonies, or you go back to Black Panther movements. There's so much to learn from all of those people, every individual, everything that's there. And I would advise young people to always go back and study those. Thirdly is to get a mentor. Having mentors are important. And there are people who want to mentor you, and for you to be humble and acknowledge the fact that, hey, this person here has more information than me, more knowledge than me, has gone through what I've gone through. And lastly, before I turn it back over, is to study people. A lot of times we get wrapped up in the movement. I myself am included. I have a goal that I want to accomplish. I have people behind me. We're all galvanized to accomplish the same thing. But if you look at the civil rights movement in particular, you'll see that there were so many movements within that one movement. You had the SCLC, you had SNCC, you had the movement where students were doing sit-ins. You had all kinds of movements that spurred from that. And while we may not admit it, a lot of that came out of disagreements between the movement itself. Even if you look back in that day, you have Martin and then you have Malcolm. And people try to posit them as being these enemies. They really weren't. They were just different ways of achieving a similar goal, but they just didn't see it the same way. So know that though you're leading a movement, you can't do it without people. And it's more important to know people, because you have to know what motivates people, what excites people, what incites people, what drives people. So, I always recommend that people read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, when you're starting out in leadership capacities, because if you don't know how to get people behind you, your movement is going to fail. If people are the engine, you're going to be running a solo movement out here. And a lot of times you get people who don't know how to talk to people, don't know how to communicate with people, don't know how to communicate their message forward. Don't know how to get other people to believe in them because they're so focused on either the movement or themselves. So staying humble, finding mentors, studying the past, and learning people, I would say, would be one of the 4 primary focal points in terms of becoming and being a leader of a movement.
Thank you for those 4 focal points, and so important. And that latter point that you made about people, so important, about how do we involve people, which leads to my next question. And I'm going to go back to you, Leo, for my next question, which is, as you think about your work And I even mentioned the Environmental Justice Network and other work that you're doing. How do you get young people interested and engaged, both as a professor, right, but also in that co-curricular process as well, so outside of the classroom as well?
You know, that question, you know, brings a lot of memories back. Um, you know, first of all, let me say thank you to my fellow panelists for, you know, your work and, you know, what you said in terms of having people believe in you. You know, Dr. Coleman, one of the last times we interacted on Zoom, I gave this story about taking a set of students to Central Park. It was a moment. And I say this because, you know, many times, sometimes what becomes a movement goes back to a moment. Goes back to a moment. You know, so here I was, this idyllic, polished landscape with all these amazing middle-class American people walking their dogs and looking all fine. And I was with my kids, and we were having this activity, and, you know, this, you know, black girl, she couldn't have been even 5 feet tall. She was like way under me, and, you know, she turned to me and she said, you know, Professor Douglas, have you seen When They See Us? You know, and I stopped. And I looked at her like, "Oh, okay, I see you, I see you. You trying to call me out before all these white folk and get me in problems." You know, but when I looked into her eyes, that moment deserved a response. You know, she was describing the discomfort she felt as a woman of color being in what is a white space. That moment transformed all the other years that I've spent here at NYU. It brought me to the Environmental Racial Justice Network. What I realized was that students were looking to me for a level of leadership above and beyond what was in the textbook. They were looking to me because they identified that based on my identity, that I could give them a vision not only of what is, but what was and what could be. And that was the start of a movement of sorts. A movement in how classes are taught, a movement in terms of approaching to teachers, a movement about content, which still continues to ripple through the Environmental and Racial Justice Network today as we continue to contest, you know, how spaces are taught, you know, how information is given, how the same thing, you know, the plants and those gorgeous flowers in Central Park can mean something very different depending on where you came from and who you are. You know, it could be something which is so joyous, and it could be something which brings back serious trauma. You know, so, you know, as we think about this idea of movements, what movements are, how do they origin, how they go forth, you know, we have to recognize, and I was listening very carefully as you spoke as well in terms of, you know, what movement means within academic circles. Because, you know, we sit in a very unusual space to talk about movements. Yes. Because academia and universities, everything, I assume that we're all academics at some level in this space. We could also argue that we're under a place where we're heavily constrained in terms of what we can do, what we can say, you know, how we progress with ideas, purport to be demanding change, you know, the powers that we then kind of in opposition to, and whether we're celebrated for these things or marginalized for them. I'm also hoping that in the part of this discussion that we're going to continue to think in terms of what does movements and transformative change mean within universities, within university spaces. First of all, even ask the question whether or not these are spaces for transformation, for and against whether or not this idea of doing research, pure applied research, contributes, is transformative, is a part of a movement. I think there's a lot to be said and discussed there. And just pulling it back, I think it's so much important for who we are in this room, because invariably how we see the world and the change that we need is going to be very different from what the people, when we step outside onto Waverly Place, are going to be seeing.
And thank you for drawing attention to those points. And thank you for also talking about what you learned, right, from your student that then transformed your work from there. Because I think sometimes when we think about the professorship, it's that idea of professing out, but we don't think about the learning coming within. And so thank you for drawing that point and the importance of that in shaping how we see the world. So Donald, I'm going to come to you next and ask you, because as we think about movements and as we think about issues across the world, we know that HIV, right, has been an issue that has persisted. Sometimes misinformation even continues today, particularly even in moments when we have pandemics, et cetera, and we sort of lose sight of some of these issues. And so as you think about movement work and really then addressing this idea of disease, can you talk to us a little bit about the work that you've been doing around HIV and why you see that as important work as we think about movement and diasporic work?
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. My work, as was mentioned, has been mostly on promoting HIV testing. And for me to provide more context, I'll just share a little bit of how I started becoming interested in HIV and then eventually connected to the movement. I think it was mentioned that I was born and raised in Haiti, or at least that's my native country. So I came from Haiti in 1999 to New York and learned English, went to school here. Eventually, I made it to undergrad and I started to learn about research. And there was this NIH-funded program called Minority Access to Research Career. And I like to, as the part of me that wants to increase research interest amongst young people, always trying to look for opportunities that will allow you to learn about research. So that's just one of them. And there were two options. One was to work with mice, or one was to work with people. So I said, I want to work with people. I was majoring in psychology. I didn't have an interest in working with mice. And then just so happens that the professor who was working with people was working on HIV. And having known very little about HIV at the time, I said, okay, well, this program is paying $900 a month. It's either that or working at Pathmark. So let me stick with this.
Thank you for speaking to the reality of graduate school and what you have to get paid, right?
Yes. So I stayed the course, spent 2 years initially learning about HIV and people living with HIV and the stigma. And one of the things I did not expect was when I would tell people, oh, I'm working on HIV, they were like, what are you doing? Why are you working on this, stigmatized topic? Do you have HIV? And I said, oh, no. But then I realized, the moment was now I was no longer just learning about HIV. I had to be part of the group to inform people that, no, HIV, just because I do research on HIV doesn't mean I have it. And please, even if somebody did have HIV, that's not a reason for you to, give them this look. And I was, of course, learning about more and more and realizing I couldn't just separate myself from the work that I was starting to learn. But it was not until I was talking to a Haitian professor and he said, oh, you're working on HIV? I said, yes, I am. He said, do you know that there was a time in the US when if you were Haitian, you couldn't say you are Haitian? I said, what do you mean? He said, because Haitians were being evicted, fired, discriminated against because of the one of the reports from the Centers for Disease Control that labeled Haitian as one of the 4 groups responsible for bringing HIV to the U.S. As a mistake, big mistake back in the 1990s. But that label has stayed with the Haitian community till now. And I was very upset because I had been, again, working on HIV with this professor. I even took a course on HIV. And now I was like, wow, now I have to go learn about this for my community and see what it means and how to now, again, dig deeper while still understanding. The deeper I dig, the more I'm becoming part of that movement that has started both within the larger world to help fight this disease, but within the Haitian community that had their own movement in 1991 when 40,000 Haitians walked over the Brooklyn Bridge here to fight this, wrong label. And lastly, in 2010, when I was a PhD student now, deep in my work, learning about stigma and how it affects the Haitian community, there's a DJ on Hot 97, the most popular radio station in the tri-state area, who said the reason he does not date Haitian women is because they have HIV. Yes. So this again now we've stirred up the Haitian community, to come and fight and continue this movement, and just over. So there's that movement, but there's the larger movement, and I think a lot of people who don't work on HIV/AIDS, the only way to really make them understand is to use COVID as an example, because that's the closest example we all can relate to, and what it means to move and kind of all work together toward the same goal, to try to stop people from dying from a disease, stop from acquiring the disease. And I think for me, over the years, the HIV/AIDS movement has taught a lot to global health communities, even people who don't work in health. And with the COVID pandemic, a lot of the lessons that were used to tackle, the pandemic came from the HIV field. And I think that the future is going to require more movement like this, because COVID is not going to be the last pandemic, to affect us as a world. So,
thank you so much for that description, and thank you for taking us back to the 4 H's, because that's really important, and thinking about that conflation of Haitianness and Blackness in a particular moment, in that historical moment in the late 80s and 90s around disease, and particularly HIV. And thank you for your work in this area. I don't know where we are in time, but Will, I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm just going to say to you, my last question will be to all of you, and my last question will be to imagine what your 8 to 13-year-old self would think of yourself today. So for the two panelists who've already answered the other question, you start to think. And Will, my last question on this sort of thematic is, as you think about, and so if you think about roadblocks for young leaders, right, and if you think about some of the things that we've talked about here today in terms of leadership, sort of building a movement, what do you see as some of the roadblocks that young people, particularly because you're in, working global programs, encounter today in terms of achieving, right, movement building collectively?
All right.
Very simple question.
Yeah, simple, excellent. Thank you. So let me start by asking you, are these college? Are you in college here? Okay, so let me ask a question. If I told you that today I could give you a degree and you could walk out the door, you wouldn't have to go any more classes, who would do it? I appreciate the honesty. Thank you. For those of y'all who didn't raise your hand, I don't believe you. But I appreciate the honesty. But I would say that is probably, if not a roadblock, definitely a speed bump that I see is having to take your time. Even I met Eldridge Cleaver's wife a few years ago, and she said one of the things that she ran into with the Black Panther Party was their problem was they wanted freedom tomorrow. That's why they were going out with weapons and fighting. They didn't want to wait 20 and 30 years. There's a lot of time that you have to invest in movements and leaderships. I met Dr. Conserve a few years ago, and I was very ignorant to what HIV and AIDS was. I mean, and he taught me about rural communities and how small they were, and they don't have access to knowledge to know. I mean, Dr. Conserve taught me, and I was in higher education setting, what PrEP was, what being undetectable was, what at-home self-testing was. But because I was exposed to that, I had a chance to grow my knowledge. I think we have to be patient. As a roadblock that I see is a lot of young people want things, they want it now and they want it tomorrow. And there's a lot of exposure over life that has to take place, a lot of growth and movements that have to take place. You have to realize that things take time. A lot of times we rush our agendas, we lose motivation, we lose drive because things aren't coming as quick as we want them to. I hear a lot of people now ask, what happened to the Black Lives Matters movement? Some things have splintered. People have tried to start their own movements out of that, and there are people becoming impatient with the progress that is being made. But I always say progress is being made nonetheless. So I urge people who are meeting those roadblocks of impatience and not wanting to see things grow over time. There's a saying that says, a man who plants a tree today, knowing he won't get to enjoy the shade, understands the true meaning of life. What you're doing now, the social movements that we're engaging now, we may not get to see the fruits of that labor. A lot of the people who died in our social movements, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all of the Black Panthers who passed away, didn't get to see this level of the mountaintop that Martin Luther King talked about. But we have reached a place in American history that a lot of times people thought would be unfathomable. So patience is definitely, if not a roadblock, definitely a speed bump that I think we need to be cognizant of. Secondly, is there's institutionalized racism in place. There are institutionalized structures in place that block us. You know, I work and study abroad, and a lot of times they ask me how I can increase minority participation in study abroad, and they don't know about the differences in socioeconomic statuses. Some people are moneyed, and they get an opportunity to go abroad. They don't have access to financial aid. Some people have to work. Some people have close family ties. There are a lot of things that other communities don't know about Black communities or minoritized communities just because they haven't been exposed. And so they hire people or they bring these initiatives to the forefront, and they expect us to double, quadruple, you know, participation among minorities when it's just not that easy. So roadblocks that are institutionalized are also something that I would say you need to look out for in social movements.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing up patience. As a gardener, I am a gardener, so when I plant things, I know I won't see the fruits of my labor probably in my lifetime sometimes. And also I think embedded in that are to really notice the small wins, right? Because patience, you have to notice the process along the way. And of course, institutionalized racism and the byproducts of that are institutionalized in the fabric of so much of our institutional practices, right? Not just the institutions, but the practices. So thank you. And so this question, this is my last question here. This is a question, and I said this earlier with Renee Blake, this is a question that a friend of mine asked me years ago. And I was having a bad day, actually. And she said, it was true, and she said, Lisa, you know, what would your 8 to, and she went through 18 to 13, she went up to 15 eventually, self think of you today and what you have done or not done, etc. And it made me laugh. It took me out of where I was. So this is my question to you all. You don't have to choose 8. Renee, I think, chose 13 earlier today, and I will let anyone who wants to start. Okay.
All right, I'll go for it. 8 to 13-year-old self. Oh my goodness. Well, when I was 8, I thought I was going to be a pastor like my dad. I haven't started a church yet. Or maybe environmentalism is my church, maybe?
I've seen you lecture.
Good point. Hallelujah, sister. Yeah, but I felt, you know, going back to the lives that my parents lived, they did not have college education. But they believed in change. They believed in action. You know, they were invested in this. This was their life. You know, you can line the people up today who went to school, got jobs, had transformation in how they ran their business, lived their family lives because of what was happening in our living room with my dad and my mom and dad as pastors. So let's reflect on this. Okay, so like, you know, all right, so like 2 masters, well, 3 masters, a PhD, 2 from Columbia University, one of the iconic schools. How many lives have I changed? I mean, really? You know, at my funeral, how many people are going to stand up and say, like, you know, my family would have gone without had it not for Dr. Douglas? I'm not sure. I'm just not sure. But I'm not saying that I'm not making change. That's not the point. But my point is that at 8, I definitely would have felt like I would have been making more change like my parents. But I take this as a challenge today, and I take this into my work, and you can see it in everybody here on the stage, how much our personal life, how our desire for a better world informs everything we do. So we have our day job, you know, and sometimes our day job becomes that. Sometimes it's not really. We still have our research or academic careers or deanships or whatever those things are, but we're still driving for change. We're still aspiring to this position of a wider change, a more just world for people. So at 8, I definitely had this aspiration that the Dr. Coleman, the journey continues.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Leo. Okay.
Thank you. I think my 8, 10, or 12-year-old self would say first, he's happy of the woman I married, Sylvia Sharima. Thank you. Thank you. Charlotte Conserve, our daughter. And, you know, I think honestly speaking, I think my 8-year-old self, or, you know, whatever age we choose, would say, I'm happy of the roadblocks that you overcame to make it to wherever you are. Because I was talking to, I think, someone recently, and I said, we were talking about The Alchemist, the book The Alchemist, my wife. And she said, you know, people talk about this book so much. What do you make out of it? You know, and of course you can make different things out of it based on your experience. But I think one of the key things is that, you know, my wife said, you know, he had to get beaten, you know, to be eventually told, had to go through all these paths. And I said, you know, life sometimes most likely requires that. Yes, there are some people with more privileges than others, but for the majority of those people who do not have those privileges, they will have to go through these obstacles, whether that's leaving their families behind. Some, unfortunately, take, you know, boats, and you name it, the list goes on. And you probably have your own roadblocks that you're facing right now as we're speaking, right? But you have to go through those to make it to the next level. And, you know, they say a diamond is not made overnight, right? So you have to go through that tough time, unfortunately. But I hope, you know, we all get to see the other side of those roadblocks that we have to go through. So that's what I think my 8-year-old self would say.
Thank you so much. Will.
Yeah, I would definitely like to echo that. So I was telling my colleague earlier that I grew up in Nigeria. I moved to Nigeria when I was 1, so it was about 8 or 9 years old when I came back. And I came back to America in the heart of a place called Orangeburg, South Carolina, with this thick West African accent. I won't say anything now. I won't do it. But yeah, I came back with this thick West African accent, and you know, all of my classmates had a lot of jokes. I mean, I can laugh about it now, but at 8, it was really dehumanizing. You know, when they would come to me and ask me, did you ride to school on a zebra? Did you go to school? Did you live in sorry, that's Barack Obama. call him back. Did you live in a hut? Did you eat every day? And they were serious. I was in the 4th grade. I just got back. They were serious with these inquisitions. And I remember running home to my mother and father, and I'd tell, pull the pictures out. Pull the picture. I'm taking these pictures to school tomorrow to show them that we lived in a house. We had a car called a Peugeot. They don't even know about Peugeots here, you know what I mean? But we were rocking Peugeots back in the day, and know about those. So, but it was really, just going to school every day, getting picked on, and trying to tell people, that Africa is not what they saw on TV and on National Geographic, and trying to do that at 8 and 9 and 10 years old was a true struggle. And I was telling those people, if that's what you think about, and first of all, they thought Africa was a country. So that made it even more interesting. But if that's what you think about the continent, then you really need to go. And so now I work in study abroad, international affairs, and that's the story that I tell. I've been trying to tell people to study abroad since I was 8 years old. And so what my 8-year-old self would say is, you found value in your trauma. And so I think we can all do that. At 8, 9, 10, whatever hardships you're going through, you can find value in that, as Dr. Conserve was saying. Even if you get through it, there's value, and it has a purpose. All things have their reasons. You went through that at 8 to be where you are now. And now those very same people follow me on social media, right? They follow me on social media, and they see me all over the world, and they say, man, I wish, I had those experiences that you're having now, because I found value in what was once a very difficult point of life.
Amen.
So thank you to our panelists. We have value in the trauma, the roadblocks that we can be actually grateful for that we were able to overcome and find the possibilities. The diamonds aren't made overnight, and we are working for a more just world, even outside of our titles. It is a joy and a pleasure to have been on this panel with you all. Thank you so much. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you.
Can we give Dr. Coleman a round of applause, please?
And so now we'll take some questions. I think we have time for some questions for our panelists, if we have any out there.
Hey, so I guess I'm in a unique position of building a movement, obviously, with the National African Student Association. So one thing that I think you've all touched on, and I think Will, you mentioned it pretty well, the cultural divide. We, like, maybe taking the Black Lives Matter as an example, I think when that movement started, a lot of African students did not know how to engage. That's just something that I noticed, and I think it's a matter of that cultural divide that exists. So if you want to build a movement that is strong, and African diaspora is not just Africans, it's African Americans, it's Caribbeans, it's everything. So if you want to build a strong movement, how do we tackle that problem of the cultural divide?
Anyone can weigh in.
So I'll touch briefly. So Dr. Coleman's work in OGI is work that is invaluable. And I think it's invaluable because in a lot of situations, especially not just in America, but all throughout the world, we look for things that make us different. And I think that in doing work where we want to have diverse populations and diverse people involved in anything, a workplace, a movement, we have to look for things that make us the same. So having the common goal and reaching out to express to someone, no matter where you're from. Malcolm X, at the end of his, after his pilgrimage to Mecca, he said, look, I don't care what color you are. If you are trying to help us fight injustice, then come join us. So it's more so he changed it from color being his bellwether and deciding factor to the cause. And so I think if we're able to articulate that to anyone we meet in a way that says, look, this isn't about black people, this isn't about white people, this is about a better world, then I think we'll have an easier chance of recruiting and getting people across cultures to engage in the movements.
I have a story from Columbia, South Carolina, when I used to live in Columbia, South Carolina with Will. And I was going to a church, an African-American church, and I told them, oh, I'm going to Tanzania. And the pastor, great person, you know, still very well connected. And he said, wow, you know, I'm excited for you. Are there any people who look like us there? And I had two reactions. One was, what do you mean? We all look the same over there, right? But then the second one was, I had to like now take a step back and say, wait a minute, you know, before I went to Nigeria, South Africa, I didn't know, you know. I also had a limited understanding of what we look like or what we do, right? And I say this to say the differences that are there have to be appreciated, even if it's hard to navigate, because realistically, we can't, you know, I think we may do it sometime. We may assume that just because we look similarly or, you know, we all black, that we should automatically just gravel toward each other. And unfortunately, that is not, that's not how it's been, and that's not how it's going to be. So I think with that realization, then we need to, those of us who are interested in, you know, making unity the cause, have to, first of all, appreciate that difference and take the time, you know, it's going to take time to continue to massage that difference and see where you can connect, and then eventually, you know, take it from there. Like, I'm from Haiti, I'm married to a Tanzanian, I live here in America, I work here, right? We are all navigating different spaces, but it takes time for a person to say, okay, you know what, I do want to associate with Africans in a way that's not as distant as it seems to be. You know, people have to go through their own journeys, and I don't think you can force that on anyone.
I'd like to respond a little bit, if that's okay, too, is that this came up also during the conversation with Professor Blake. And I think that we do need to learn, when I said this earlier, we need to learn how to love one another. We have to learn to love one another in our specificities, right? So if we're from Haiti or Samoa or Brazil or Accra or Lagos, and that means that we have to lean into each other, because we have been corrupted by the narratives that have been told, the lies about one another, right? The lies about the Caribbean, the lies about African Americans, the lies about Africa as a country, right? Those lies have permeated us as well. And that's hard to reckon with, right? That's hard, because but that's the reality. That was told, those lies were told to divide us. And so I want to say this. I stepped off a plane, and I think I know a lot about the world because I travel the world. I stepped off the plane in Fiji, and the Fijian put me in the Fiji line and kept calling me Fijian because I look Fijian. And I was like, why do you keep putting me in the Fijian line? Because I just assumed when I got to Fiji, the people in the working in the airport, I was like, well, not everybody in Fiji looks like this. It's just the people in the airport. But actually, as it turns out, the people in Fiji, and then they kept asking me, where are you from? And I was like, this place called the United States of America? And I'm a dime a dozen. I mean, I look like a dime a dozen people, right? I mean, literally copycat. Like I got a gazillion friends who look like me, et cetera, right? So it was fascinating to me, but it was the lies that we had been told. Right? And the Fijians I met were like, wait, you're from America? Are there others like you? So these are the things that have been told to divide us. And that's why we have to lean into the learning and into the love of ourselves, because we have been fractured on purpose.
I'll just I'll just answer really quick as well, because I think it's such an important point. You know, Schonberg, who the Schonberg Center is named after, he said he wanted to do the work that he did because he had a moment. You know, somebody told him when he was a child that people who were of African descent had no history. And he dedicated his life and started a movement to actually show that that was not the case. You know, let's take that back to Jamaicans, Caribbean, Brazilians, Afro-Brazilians, I'm talking about Afro-Jamaicans, African Americans. And again, you know, we've been so taught that, you know, we didn't exist before that slave ship like pulled up in the Carolinas or on Jamaica. Like, we just kind of materialized, didn't we? There was nothing else that happened before that. There was no languages, no history, no culture, no traditions, no spirituality, no nothing. So, you know, we have to kind of set this discussion in terms of this divide. You know, I grew up in a country which was, I would say, a little bit relatively more educated because there were these other movements. There was Garveyism, you know, there was Rasta, you know, these kind of back to Africa movements where people were actually resisting that narrative like, oh no, we are actually from somewhere. And, you know, there were things that we did and, you know, we want to reconnect with that. And I think there have been ebbs and flows in that. There's always going to be those who will try to deny that there is that history, but getting back there is so important because that's where we're going to find the unity, you know, in that collective identity that we share and building from that. And we can also understand why the narratives that we're hearing so much now in politics are so important in terms of denying the teaching of historical evidence, histories of Black identity, Black culture, what happened, how we get to this point. Because, you know, once people know that, you know, we become empowered, you know, to move forward into a future. And, you know, capitalist societies, you know, built on colonialism don't want that.
Thank you so much. Again, I know, do we have time? No, we're out of time. We're out of time.
It was just a comment.
Okay.
I was just going to acknowledge the NAfSA, National African Student Association, for the work you're doing, because this work you're doing is part of bringing people together. I fell in love with Africa through the African Student Association at my undergrad, listening to that music, the food, and then, you know, eventually going to Nigeria. So the movement you are doing is very important in trying to bring that unity, even if you may not feel that it's there, but it's there.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists again.